Alrighty, so just gonna get started now. But hello, everyone. My name is Kayla, and I'm a watershed planning technician here at NSWA, and it is my pleasure to be your host for this hour. The North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance is excited to welcome you to our second Watershed Wednesday webinar of the fall season to discuss the topic of agriculture and water. We've been running these webinars once a month on Wednesdays throughout the fall and winter for a while now, and have had a variety of great guest speakers, discussed exciting local initiatives, research, and projects happening in our watershed and beyond. These webinars provide the opportunity for you to learn something new and ask questions over your lunch hour. So before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. Today's webinar will be recorded and later shared on our YouTube channel. You can also see our past Watershed Wednesday webinar series videos there as well. And we would also appreciate that you please keep your microphone muted during the presentations. We will have a Q&A period during the last 10 minutes of the webinar, and we ask that you use the chat feature to post your questions there. So today I would like to start the webinar off in a good way. In the spirit of respect and reciprocity, NSWA acknowledges that the lands within the watershed of the North Saskatchewan River are in Treaty 6, Treaty 8, and the Métis homeland. These lands are the traditional territories, traveling routes, and gathering places of the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, Stony, and Nakota Sioux. We recognize and thank the Indigenous peoples who have cared for this land since time immemorial, and whose rich histories, cultures, languages, and presence continue to enrich these sacred lands that we all steward as treaty people. We invite participants to learn about the Indigenous peoples whose lands you reside in, and I welcome you to reflect on your place within the watershed. If you would like, please share in the chat where you're dialing in from today. So we're joined by Nicole Seitz Vermeer and Chad Ritter as they share their insight and expertise gained from working in the agriculture and water field. Following the two presentations, Nicole and Chad will answer questions from the audience. So again, feel free to add your questions into the chat box throughout the webinar, and we will address them during the Q&A period at the end. So without further ado, Nicole will start us off with her presentation on the nutrient targets for small streams and agricultural watersheds in Alberta. She is a water quality specialist, currently residing in Lethbridge, Alberta, and has been with Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation for 11 years. She holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Lethbridge and a Master's of Science from the University of Saskatchewan. Her past experience includes projects related to agricultural water quality, beneficial management practices, nutrient management, and aquatic invasive species. In her work, she strives to support the agricultural industry in making proactive decisions that optimize agricultural production and the stewardship of natural resources. Please give a warm welcome to Nicole. And so give me a second here, because I'll be sharing her presentation slides.
Thanks. While you're doing that, I just want to say, so I'm joining you from Lethbridge, which is in Treaty 7 territory, home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani peoples. Okay, we're good to go. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about a project that was done in 2016 to 2020. You can go to the next slide. So the final report is available on Open Alberta and was just completed last month. Next slide. So this is a bit unconventional, but I'm going to start with acknowledgements. You'll notice my name isn't actually on there. So just some full disclosure that the extent of my involvement in this project was pulling together the final report. So I wasn't involved in the experimental design or data collection or decision making. Most of that credit goes to Dr. Greg Pierkowski and Madison Cobrin, who moved on from agriculture and irrigation shortly after the project was completed, but before the final report was written. Next slide. So past research within our ministry has found that for small agricultural watersheds, As agricultural intensity increases, nutrients also tend to increase. And so increased nutrients, of course, can lead to downstream eutrophication that can alter water quality and aquatic ecosystems. And the agriculture industry recognizes that management of land and water resources will allow the sector to remain viable and are looking for ways to improve their environmental stewardship. Next slide. One of the challenges, though, for addressing nutrient concentrations in surface water in Alberta is that Alberta's surface water quality guidelines don't provide a numeric value for nutrients, so for nitrogen and phosphorus. But at the same time, a single numeric guideline wouldn't be appropriate for all provincial waters. So instead, a narrative statement is provided that says nutrient concentrations should be maintained, and if priorities warrant, site-specific nutrient objectives should be developed. Next slide. So these are the study objectives, and I'm just going to talk about the first one, which was kind of the overall objective, which was to recommend numeric nutrient targets for small agricultural streams using a stressor response approach. And so recommending nutrient targets based on natural region and watershed class. Next slide. And so what is meant by small agricultural streams? So these would be 3rd to 5th Strawler order or Huck 8 watersheds, hydrologic unit code 8. These would be streams that are non-ephemeral. They respond to the spring freshet, but they still have persistent flow and don't dry up at the end of the season. Next slide. So this study included 82 watersheds that fell within one of the boreal, parkland, or grassland ecoregions. Data was collected from 2017 to 2020, with each watershed within a natural region receiving 2 seasons of data collection. So what I mean by that is for 2017 and 2018, the focus was on the grassland and parkland watersheds, and in 2019 and 2020, the focus was on the boreal watersheds. And data was collected in the spring and summer months. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the study used a stressor response approach, which is shown in this hypothetical graph here, where ecosystem structure and function, those ecosystem responses on the y-axis, are measured together with nutrient concentrations or the nutrient stressors of nitrogen and phosphorus. And so taking those measurements in a range of representative streams, which requires an establishment of a gradient of different nutrient concentrations. And I'll explain that a little bit more as I go, but essentially a stressor response approach looks for where and when a shift in the data occurs, indicated by that red line on the graph there. Next slide. And so in terms of nutrient gradients, watersheds were selected based on several criteria. So one of which was the contribution to a nutrient gradient in whichever natural region. So it was important to select a wide range of different streams that had varying nutrient concentrations in order to build a data set that had a representative range of watersheds. So we can see here there's distinct nutrient gradients with average concentrations going from low to high. The horizontal lines there indicate the average concentrations for each of the watersheds in the natural regions indicated by those vertical bars. And so for interest here for this audience, the blue arrows indicate the watersheds that fell within the North Saskatchewan watershed. Next slide. And as sometimes happens in these longer term studies, there's always new learnings and realizations. And one of those learnings was that watersheds can actually overlap 2 or more natural regions, making it difficult to assign a natural region-based nutrient target to those watersheds. And some of those examples are shown in the red circles there, which indicate kind of different watershed groupings, depending on if it's in a natural region or the watershed class. And so the last 2 years of the study were aimed at developing a watershed classification for the study watersheds and developing nutrient targets based on the resulting watershed classes. And the watershed classes were developed using what are called self-organizing maps, which I'm not going to get into, but essentially it looks at factors like climate, geography, hydrology, and topography to develop those classifications. So more how water flows through the landscape rather than what's on the landscape. Next slide. And so just quickly, we can see that from those watershed classifications, there remains a fairly distinct nutrient gradient going from low to high. I should mention too, this is for total nitrogen. And again, the arrows showing the watersheds that fell within the North Sask that were included in this study. And we can see from the light blue arrows in the class 3 category that there was some regrouping that happened. Next slide. Okay, so I've talked a bit about nitrogen and phosphorus, so those stressors. So then in terms of ecosystem response, we looked at structure and function. And so the structure metrics were determined by things like attached algae, attached to suspended substrates. Which would indicate pigments, biomass, community composition. And then we also measured for suspended algae, which was an indication of biomass, so suspended algae within the water column. So those structure metrics were, data was collected for those structure metrics at every watershed within each of those 82 watersheds within the study. And then a subset of watersheds were chosen to measure for function, for ecosystem function, which included metabolism and litter decomposition, as well as nutrient uptake. Next slide. So just to briefly give an indication of the metrics we were working with, in total there were 14 structure metrics and 10 function metrics. So I've chosen the Shannon Diversity Index to show one of the structure metrics shown in the blue rectangle, and then I've chosen gross primary productivity to give an example of one of the function metrics. And so these just show the distribution of the data based on spring or summer and by natural region and watershed class. And the horizontal lines there indicate the median, the plus signs are the mean. Next slide. Okay, so then and I say we, it wasn't me, but the study, the folks who were involved with the study, the threshold analysis was performed to determine concentrations where we would see a change in the ecosystem response. And so what this included was, so there were 24 response metrics, 2 stressor metrics. There were, 3 natural regions, 3 watershed classes, 2 seasons, and then we used 3 different statistical tests. So this kind of gives an indication of all the different combinations that were used to determine these thresholds. Keep in mind that not all function metrics were run for each watershed or each season. So trying to do the math from this slide isn't going to make much sense, but essentially we were left with 1,086 total different combinations that were tested. Next slide. So there were some selection criteria to determine which models were a good fit for the data, and each one was scrutinized on, if it met the shape and pattern that we would expect in terms of an ecosystem response, and showing a distinct shift in the aquatic ecosystem depending on which response metric was being examined. So this graphic shows chlorophyll A, for example, which we would expect an increase with increasing nutrient concentrations. This shows total phosphorus. And I should mention too that scrutiny of the models was based largely on professional opinion. So, there's some human error. But the main takeaway here is that not all models were strong enough to be included in the final risk boundary categorization. So there were 289 models that were used for that. So the top graph there shows the count data based on a bootstrap distribution. The middle graph is in log units, which were then back transformed into milligrams per liter to give the actual threshold value shown on the bottom of the graph, or the bottom graph there. And so that is one of the 289 retained threshold models used to derive the aquatic ecosystem health impairment categories. So this slide shows how we defined the aquatic ecosystem health impairment categories, or the nutrient target ranges. It's based on the distribution of those retained models that I mentioned for each nutrient response metric, et cetera. So the threshold values, or the nutrient concentrations, those less than the 10th percentile were classified as low risk. Concentrations between the 10th and 50th were moderate, and then concentrations greater than the 50th percentile were deemed to be high risk. Next slide. So we end up with something that looks like this, which are the nutrient target ranges based on natural region, watershed class, season, for total nitrogen and total phosphorus. The study recommends using the summer watershed category values. Reason being that the summer data was a bit more reliable. There was a lot of challenges with the spring data collection. And also the watershed classes are recommended because the ecosystem impairment ranges for watershed class appear to better reflect the similarities among the streams in the study. Next slide. So to sum it up, the study developed numeric nutrient bounds to categorize watersheds into low, moderate, or high risk of aquatic ecosystem impairment, recommending that the summer watershed categories be used. The study also recommends when applying these boundaries for like a watershed management plan, that a phased approach be used. So if a watershed is determined to be high risk, the next logical step would be to aim for a more moderate risk rating. The outcomes of the study can be used voluntarily by watershed managers, and to help inform aquatic ecosystem health status, and to meet environmental stewardship goals for industry as well. And so these boundaries are completely voluntary. And just next slide, some final considerations. So eutrophication can be a natural process of lake or water body aging, but we do know that it can be accelerated by human activity. The nutrient targets developed here are for different natural regions and watershed categories, but there may be some more work involved in determining actual site or watershed specific targets. Also, realistically, a maintain or improve approach may be the most reasonable. to set any nutrient. We are not advocating to set hard numbers. Any nutrient targets or efforts to reduce nutrient loading need to be achievable by industry through that continuous improvement. And so one of those ways would be, you hear a lot about beneficial management practices for nutrient management. And I would also say that we know from our past research that beneficial management practices do make a difference at the field scale in the short term, but larger scale improvements may take a bit longer. But a good practice would be to prioritize critical source areas, so areas in a watershed that contribute disproportionate pollutant loads. So in terms of an agricultural watershed, those would be like areas with high runoff or high nutrient sources, maybe manure storage, those kinds of things. And of course, in close proximity to a stream. And then finally, I need to emphasize that, so these nutrient targets, they're meant to supplement current management plans. They're meant to be used voluntarily. They don't hold any regulatory authority. And next slide. I think I have a few minutes left. I just wanted to provide a little highlight of the North Saskatchewan River Basin in terms of the watersheds that fell within the North Sask watershed, which it wasn't a focus of the study, but just given the audience today. Next slide. This is my very poor GIS skills here. My rough attempt to show the watersheds in the study that fell within the North Sask River Basin here. So there were 17 of the watersheds that fell within the basin, 11 within the Boreal, 6 within the Parkland. Alternatively, 9 of those were Class 2 watersheds and 8 were Class 3 watersheds. Next slide. And so this shows total nitrogen concentrations of those 17 streams that we looked at that were within the North Sask. These are based on average concentration. So recall that each stream was sampled for 2 years. So comparing those concentrations to the risk category boundaries for the summer watershed category, we can see that for total nitrogen, all of those 17 watersheds were above the upper bounds for Class 2 and Class 3 watersheds. We can see that some were just barely above the bound, whereas there were some that were quite a ways above that would be considered high risk. So I would say that this isn't terribly surprising or worrisome, because when we compare it to all of the 82 watersheds in the study for total nitrogen, we see the majority, so 76% of Class 2 watersheds and 81% of Class 3 watersheds were also categorized as high risk. Next slide. And then when we look at total phosphorus, we can see first off, shown by those yellow stars, we see some of the same watersheds that had high total nitrogen also have high total phosphorus. But we also see that there were many watersheds that were between the low and high boundaries that could be considered moderate risk for aquatic ecosystem impairment. And so compared to the 82 watersheds within the study, we can see that 81% of the Class 2 watersheds and 59% of the Class 3 watersheds were actually high risk for total phosphorus. So I'm not sure what looks like the North Sask watersheds might be faring a bit better in terms of their total phosphorus concentrations. I'm not sure, but anyway, just to give you an example of kind of where the North Sask watersheds fell. So next slide. That's my last one. Yeah, so thanks. That's all I have for you today.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Nicole. It's really interesting to kind of learn about all that, and really cool to see how it's important to collect data like this to inform our management practices in, watershed basins in Alberta. So thank you. Just a reminder too for everyone, if you guys have any questions for Nicole, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll come back to them at the very end of the webinar once Chad finishes his presentation. So of course, the second presenter we would like to welcome today is Chad Ritter. Chad was born and raised on a mixed farming operation located directly south of Stony Plain, Alberta, in Parkland County, where he continues to farm alongside his father. Currently, their family farm consists of annual crops and additional pastureland to support the cow and calf operation. Agriculture has always been his passion, which led him to pursue a Crop Technology Diploma at Lakeland College. And before graduating in 2019, Chad worked for Parkland County in their crop inspection program. He continues to work there today, having moved on to various roles such as the Agronomics Assistant, Supervisor Agronomics, and now the current ALUS Coordinator and Acting Manager Agronomics. So you can catch Chad outdoors in his free time, visiting the mountains, riding motorcycles, and of course, doing anything farming related. So please give a warm welcome to Chad as he presents on some of his highlights of agricultural stewardship. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Chad, and you can go ahead and share yours. Awesome. We can see it in the presenter or yeah, there we go. Now it's working. Awesome. Thanks. Take it away.
Perfect. So thank you for having me on here today. As introduced, my name is Chad Ritter, and I work currently as the ALUS Coordinator for Parkland County. So this presentation today is going to review some of the ALUS projects that relate specifically to water here in Parkland County. So as introduced, I also am a farmer in Division 4 of Parkland County. So water quality within the farming operation has always been something that's been very important to me. So I'm happy now I'm able to work with farmers and ranchers to support these projects that further support or enhance or protect water quality. So what is ALUS? As I know many of you may know, ALUS is a non-for-profit program based out of Ontario, which helps farmers and ranchers develop nature-based solutions on their farming operation. So the way ALUS works is ALUS National will source corporate sponsorship and government grants and partner with municipalities to deliver the ALUS program. So ALUS Parkland joined the ALUS program in 2012 and has been delivering nature-based solutions to farmers and ranchers since that time. The ecosystem goods and services that the ALUS projects aim at producing are things such as water filtration, clean air, carbon capture, aquifer recharge, and nutrient cycling. So the ALUS mission statement reads, ALUS engages farmers and ranchers in creating nature-based solutions on their land to build climate resilience and enhance biodiversity for the benefit of communities and future generations, which I believe this mission statement still reads really true today, as our ALUS projects in Parkland County are aimed at this very concept. So ALUS is able to make a difference by being an economic driver and by sourcing corporate funding, as well as government's funding, and by supporting these on-the-ground projects by providing establishment cost funding, as well as annual payments. As well, I believe ALUS is able to remain so successful by remaining a community-developed and farmer-delivered program. So on this slide, it highlights the ecosystem goods and services that are commonly produced by our ALUS projects. So again, things like water filtration all the way to nutrient cycling are common benefits that our ALUS projects produce. On the bottom of the slide, you'll see highlighted are some ALUS National program stats. So currently, ALUS National has invested over $30 million in funds, has over 52,000 acres enrolled in the program, and over 1,700 farmers and ranchers taking part in the program. So this is across all of Canada, as ALUS is active in Prince Edward Island, Ontario, Quebec, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and most recently moving into the States in ALUS, Iowa. So the next couple of slides will discuss the general ALUS Parkland program overview, as well as some related program stats and the project types supported by the ALUS program. in Parkland County. So for the ALUS Parkland program, currently to date, we have 44 total participants enrolled in the program and over 4,500 acres enrolled. So common ALUS projects we see in Parkland County, I always like to say the most common project we see is the fencing off or exclusion of cattle from dugouts or natural occurring water bodies, and the implementation of a solar offsite watering system. So by that, we create a buffer zone or protect the riparian zone to create that wildlife habitat and to provide water filtration to ultimately provide cleaner water for both wildlife and the livestock. Other common project types we see include solar offsite watering, as well as pasture pipelines, tree and native planting, as well as pollinator habitat planting. So things like shelter belts, reforestation, or the planting of native grasses and native wildflowers. As well, projects related to cattle grazing, we commonly see AMP or adaptive multi-paddock grazing projects, as well as deferred grazing projects, just to name a few. This slide again highlights some of our ALUS Parkland program stats. With the visual you see at the top of the screen being the stats we celebrated at the end of 2021, which was the end of our 10 years having ALUS within Parkland County. So as you can see, since this time, we have increased participants by over 5, and looks that we have enrolled an additional 1,000 acres. So ALUS Parkland is continually looking to expand and is excited to see new acres and new project types moving forward. Moving along into some specific projects, the ALUS Parkland projects highlighted here, we'll go over 3 that relate specifically to water. And these projects will range from being historically established, dating back to 2012, to more recently established projects being established in 2022. So highlighting this ALUS Parkland project, this was one of the first ALUS Parkland projects to take place in the county. So it was established in our first pilot year of the ALUS program in 2012. And this project was aimed at exclusion fencing of the Tomahawk Creek, located out in Division 6 of Parkland County. So this project has just over 39 acres of riparian zones enrolled, and keeps the cattle out of this area and provides them watering sources at more desired upland locations. So for this project, I've highlighted on the screen some before and mid-season and current photos to highlight the ALUS model and how our projects work on the landscape. So before establishing this project in 2012, cattle had full access to the creek. As you can see in the left-hand photo, lots of hummocking and pugging was created in this riparian zone, definitely making it not favorable for wildlife as well as the cattle watering in it. So by putting up the exclusion fencing, a few short years after, we were able to see native vegetation begin to regrow in the area and establish. And then most recently, on the right-hand side of the screen in 2012, we can see that the ALUS model has clearly worked here and has provided the ecosystem goods and services previously discussed. Again, here are some more photos of our Tomahawk Creek project. So these are monitoring photos that are taken in 2021, and again show the natural regrowth of native vegetation from riparian grasses to more shrubs and forbs. Moving along, the second project we wanted to highlight was a project we partnered with Cows and Fish on, and was established in 2022 and was focused at wetland and riparian exclusion. So this wetland area located on the participant's property had been impacted by beavers historically and had always been creating high water levels as well as low water levels. So the participant was looking for a way to keep water on the landscape while still keeping the beavers there. So this project included a workshop with cows and fish where we installed 2 pond levelers within this water body, which is actually part of a Parkland County licensed drainage ditch. So this ALUS project not only helped the participant achieve their goals, but helped Parkland County infrastructure be maintained and supported through the ALUS program. So this project, on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, you can see the areas that are enrolled currently. So sorry, these project acres are a bit off, but this project has upwards of 20 acres enrolled currently between open water as well as riparian zones. And here we see some 2020 monitoring photos, where on the left-hand side, if you look closely, you can see one of the pond levelers in place, traveling through the initial beaver dam. And then on this middle and far right photo, you'll see some other wetland photos showing how water was able to be held on the land for extended periods of time, while keeping the beavers on the land as well. And finally, moving along to the final project I was going to highlight. This project is one of the most exciting for me, just due to the simplicity of the project and the short time it took to produce the ecosystem goods and services. So this project was established in the fall of 2022, and this project was focused around a dugout that was constructed in the early 80s that had always had cattle having full access to the dugout until 2022. So this project simply included exclusion fencing around the dugout and the implementation of a solar offsite watering system. So this project is very small in size, with only 0.35 acres of open water being enrolled and 0.45 acres of riparian zone being enrolled. So not a large footprint, but on the next slide, it's evident to see the impacts that the ALUS program had. So here on the top right, we can see the before photo that was taken in the fall of 2022 during the initial site visit for this project. Visiting not even a year later in the summer of 2023, by just keeping the cattle out and no seeding being conducted, native vegetation was able to regrow in the area and reestablish. As well, the participant was able to note waterfowl as well as other wildlife utilizing the area where previously they were unable to due to the impacts created by the cattle. And moving along, with the focus on water quality, we wanted to highlight some water sampling or water surveying we initiated in 2023 in partnership with Dave True. So Dave True has currently been doing work in Parkland County, analyzing some of the water bodies or unnamed lakes within the Carville Pitted Delta. So Dave was a great contact to partner with, and he was able to help us do some shoreline sampling of approximately 7 ALUS projects or ALUS project water bodies. And then from this, we were able to run analysis on these samples, and Dave was able to input it into his data set to see how our ALUS projects aligned with the greater survey Dave had conducted. So looking ahead, we're excited to reconduct this survey in approximately 3 to 5 years, as the projects we monitored range from newly established to historically established projects. And by repeating this survey in years to come, we hope to build a data set to further support how our ALUS projects make a difference and benefit water quality. And then finally, prior to closing, I just wanted to highlight another aspect of my role here at Parkland County, which definitely has a tie to water quality, and that being the Environmental Farm Plan program. So for Parkland County, I am currently the EFP technician as well. So what the Environmental Farm Plan is, it's a self-awareness tool or online workbook that producers can partake in to assess their farming operation and become aware of environmental hazards or risks that their farming operation may have. So it's a great self-awareness tool for farmers and ranchers to become more aware of the impacts their farming operation has on the environment. with chapters specifically related to water and water quality, it's a great tool to help support and protect water within the farming operation. But that's all I had for today. So in closing, I just wanted to say thank you. And I have my contact information on the screen there. If anyone has any additional questions or follow-up, I'd be happy to connect with anyone. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Chad. Really appreciate that. That was a very informative presentation and cool to see how important it is to kind of just let the land be, right? So if you want to stop sharing your screen, and Nicole, if I can ask you to turn your camera on again so I can spotlight you for the questions. Awesome. So now we're at the Q&A portion of our webinar series. Going a little bit fast for time, but that's okay. So I guess for the first question, we'll start off for Nicole is, has anyone tested these on streams in the Bow River Basin? I think specifically looking at the research.
Yes, I know that there were a few of the streams that were investigated in the study did fall within the Bow River Basin. In my brain, it's by natural region, but so I think that would be in the grassland natural region. I think there were a few, yeah.
That's good to know. Is there any way that people could find that online? Would that be in the
Yes,
report?
actually, yes. In the report, there are lots of appendix tables in there that would indicate which watersheds. I think it also provides, yeah, which major drainage basin each watershed is part of.
So, yeah. For Chad, I'll ask you this question. Is there any plant health or biodiversity monitoring that occurs at project sites?
Yes, so the ALUS Parkland program, I'm fortunate enough, we do have a monitoring technician that supports the ALUS role here in the county. So riparian health assessments are commonly done in some of our exclusion areas around water bodies. As well, we can conduct rangeland health assessments on some of our grazing projects as well. So a great way to look at the plant health community there.
Yeah, very important too, right? Yeah, I guess another question for Nicole is, how would you see the voluntary targets informing municipal policy or other management practices?
Well, I wouldn't say that they should inform municipal policy directly. They would be maybe one of many reference points that could be considered. Yeah, we've advocated throughout the study that, you know, yeah, they're not meant to be used in regulatory frameworks such as you know, like the land use framework that Alberta Environment uses. So it would just be more of a informative a supporting piece.
Right, because I remember in your presentation you mentioned that these targets are not regulatory.
No.
So yeah, that could be something to just in an informant piece.
Mhm.
Another question for you is, could the targets report be utilized in grant applications to support the need for continuous water quality monitoring or to investigate eutrophication?
I would say that there's language in the report that supports conducting more site-specific investigations. So whether that means, you know, more monitoring, that would probably be something that could be used to support grant applications for that kind of thing. But the yeah, we found that the target ranges and the data were just so variable within the study. And so we wouldn't say that using those target ranges that a watershed is definitively impaired either, just an indication of impairment. So again, it would just maybe be one supporting piece to add to several different reference points.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Chad, I have a couple questions. So first one is, what do you see as the biggest barrier to having more communities involved in ALUS? And this ties into another question asking, what has ALUS done to promote awareness of this great program?
So I think some of the biggest barriers to communities adopting ALUS, you're definitely still going to have some bias or some skepticism around the program as it's delivered by municipalities primarily. But I'd say a big benefit we have in Parkland County is the council support we do have for the program. So I think a barrier would just be awareness, getting the right information out there about the program, how it is a voluntary program. It's not the money directly from the municipality supporting these projects. It's corporate funding and government sponsorship. So again, just I guess the biggest barrier would just be eliminating those biases that are out there. A great way to promote the program. I was fortunate enough to attend RMA yesterday, so lots of trade shows, extension and outreach within the municipality in the form of field days or events like that. They're a great way to kind of spread the word about ALUS and try to encourage uptake of the program.
Yeah, totally. Public awareness on these programs is a hugely important thing. It's kind of important to have those people that will be drivers of change to, support the program, but also be willing to participate in it too.
Exactly.
Yeah, Nicole, I'm not sure if you have access to the chat, but there is one sort of long question from Letta asking if that she might have missed the connection between ecological, structural, and functional response and the different risk categories. I'm not sure if you're able to read that. Yeah.
Yeah, I see it. Okay, so the response metrics gave each of those response metrics in terms of their response to the stressor. The models that were kept gave a specific nutrient concentration, or what we call a threshold, for that particular response metric. And so each response metric concentration would contribute to that range, so low to moderate, moderate to high. And so we used the number of thresholds that fell below the 10th percentile of all of them to determine that low, and then 10th to 50th to determine moderate. And so it kind of gives an indication of if the ecosystem would be impaired, and it doesn't indicate what exactly it's being impaired from, whether it's low dissolved oxygen or excessive macrophytes. It just gives kind of an indication that there might be something going on here, depending on what category or what range of concentrations a specific watershed in question, what that watershed's average nutrient concentrations might fall into within those ranges. And so another way might be just to look at, if there is kind of a issue happening within a watershed, like continual algal blooms, maybe working backwards from that, and we know for sure that there's something going on here. What do the concentrations look like? And going from there. But yeah, I know it's kind of vague in terms of what exactly is the risk. Well, it's just all of the different metrics that we looked at that indicated a change in the ecosystem. So yeah, I think that's the most I can say for that.
Yeah, that's fair. It's a bit difficult to answer some of these on the spot too, but we have another question for you, Nicole, asking if these targets could be used as guidelines values for long-term stream catchment monitoring programs, and not compliance as such, but in the absence of the provincial guidelines.
Yeah, yeah, I tend to shy away from language like guidelines and objectives and that kind of thing, for obvious reasons mentioned. But yeah, that's kind of what they're meant to be used for, is just voluntarily, like, how's the watershed doing? Is, if we if we determine that a watershed is high risk, maybe we could do a little bit more site-specific investigations, to see what's actually going on. So it's kind of it kind of just gives an indication at a higher level.
Mhm. And then another question is, did the risk analysis only consider the stream ecosystem, or did it also consider the downstream lake ecosystems as well?
No, it was just the flowing stream ecosystem.
That makes sense. I have a question for Chad that kind of relates to Nicole too, but do you by chance see any of the nutrient targets that Nicole presented on today potentially being beneficial for ALUS? Whether it be you guys going out and targeting specific locations for how you approach, bringing awareness to the program, or?
Yeah, no, I think any data that can further support kind of the need, or where there's a huge potential for benefit of ALUS projects, would be super useful, because then again, as you alluded, we can definitely target our efforts in those areas. So yeah, definitely more data the better, just to help support where we should focus on and where these projects will provide, the most ecosystem goods and services. So definitely this data would be great to utilize.
Yeah, totally. I think it's good too, because, always great to get the data and then have it be shared with everyone so that the people on the ground can do the work in the best way possible. Okay, we have a question for Chad that came in. Just wondering how it is balancing your work with ALUS and work on the farm. And she said, great talk.
Yeah, so definitely very fortunate that my day job kind of aligns with the farming practices. So they kind of go hand in hand in one another, and yeah, just do my best to make it work. So
Yeah, and I'm sure that growing up in the farm definitely took a lot into why you went into this position at ALUS too.
you bet. Yeah, it was a great fit.
Yeah, and then we have one more question for Nicole. Do you think more needs to be done to make people aware of the study, like webinars like this, and is the data available to be downloaded?
I think awareness is always key to environmental stewardship, continuing to, talk with producers and stakeholders and getting the message out. Yeah, good question about the data. I know I've talked a bit with Michelle about getting the data, or making the data available, and it's yeah, it should be available. It's tricky though. We're not like, so this is agriculture and irrigation's data. It's not like, we're not regulators like environment that maybe make their data a little bit more accessible, but I'm looking into different options definitely to make the data available. Yeah, it's funny. I've said that no one ever seems to want our data, but this particular study seems to be very of a lot of interest to people. So I know that for our irrigation water quality data, that's also available online. So looking at different options on getting more broader, like water quality study specific data available it's a little bit of a challenge, but it's I'm looking into options.
Well, with that, I would like to thank both of you for coming out and joining us today for this lunch hour. Really appreciate both presentations, and I think everyone here learned a lot today. So thanks. I'm just going to share my screen again to wrap up. Everyone see the screen then. Typical things. So yeah, thank you again for joining us today. If you liked what you saw, you can join us for our last fall webinar on December 4th. that will focus on monitoring freshwater ecosystems. Our guest speakers will be Ben Kissinger from FRI Research and Dr. Huey Jones with Alexis Nkotosu, Wakamne Science and Culture Initiative. You can register for these events on Eventbrite. And in the new year, we're starting things up again in February with Kristen Anderson presenting on wetland health and natural assets. So stay tuned for the registration info to come. And lastly, to wrap things up, the recording of this webinar, again, will be posted on our YouTube channel, and there will be a link on our website and upcoming newsletter. If you have any questions about this webinar, feel free to reach out to us via email at water@nswa.av.ca. You can also stay in touch with us via social media and by signing up for our monthly newsletter on our website at www.nswa.av.ca. So thanks again for everyone that came out today, and we really appreciate having you here.